The air within the Grand Synod of the Vraxis Dominion did not smell of organic life. It smelled of ozone, polished obsidian, and the terrifying, sterile scent of absolute authority. Here, deep within the hollowed core of the moon fortress of Gorath, the lighting was kept deliberately low, casting long, predatory shadows across the faces of the assembled council of high exarchs. They were a species built for conquest, their chitinous plating evolving over millennia from natural armor into biological art, etched with the gold and crimson sigils of subdued star systems. They sat around a table that was not merely furniture but a suspended slab of event horizon matter, captured and frozen in time, a display of mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe that served to remind any dissenters that the Dominion did not merely inhabit the galaxy, it owned it. At the head of the table sat High Exarch Malvath, his presence heavy like a collapsing star. He did not blink. His compound eyes, capable of seeing into the ultraviolet and thermal spectrums, were fixed on the holographic projection hovering above the singularity table. It showed a ship. Or rather, it showed a shape that defied the aesthetic of power the Vraxis held dear. It was a blocky, ugly thing, a chaotic assembly of struts, pressurized spheres, and rotating habitation drums that looked less like a vessel of war and more like a collection of industrial debris welded together by a desperate, dying civilization. It lacked the sleek, predatory curves of Vraxis interceptors. It lacked the shimmering, translucent hulls of the Itari mystics. It was crude. It was undeniably, pathetically human. "It is an insult," Exarch Calith hissed, his voice a grinding of tectonic plates. He gestured with a clawed hand toward the projection, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm of disdain that echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the chamber. "We gather the Synod, we interrupt the subjugation of the Valari Nebula for this? A scavenger scow? A refugee barge drifting through the exclusion zone?" Calith leaned forward, the bioluminescent markings on his carapace flaring with irritation. "The Terran Union has been warned. Their exclusion from the core sectors is absolute. They are a species of dirt farmers and mechanics, barely out of their gravity wells, clutching to the edge of the galactic spiral like barnacles on a leviathan. And yet they send this brick into the trajectory of our patrol routes." Malvath remained silent for a long moment, allowing the outrage of his subordinate to fill the room, tasting the flavor of it. It was a familiar taste. The Vraxis had conquered 1,000 worlds because they believed with religious intensity in the hierarchy of strength. Aesthetics were part of that strength. A warship should look like a predator. It should slice through the void. This human vessel looked like a factory that had lost its orbit. "It is not a warship," Malvath said finally, his voice deep, resonating in the chest cavities of everyone present. "That is the anomaly. Our sensors indicate it has negligible weapon signatures. Its energy output is erratic, fluctuating between dormant and impossibly high spikes that our technicians dismiss as sensor ghosts. It is drifting at sublight speeds, ignoring our hails, ignoring the beacons." "Then we destroy it," Calith snapped, slamming a fist onto the edge of the table. "We make an example. The Terrans rely on our mercy. They trade their raw ores and their cheap labor for the privilege of not being glassed. If they begin to violate our borders with these wandering trash heaps, we must remind them of the price of insolence. Send a patrol wing, vaporize it, broadcast the debris field to Earth." Malvath shifted his weight, the heavy armor of his station grinding softly. He looked at the third member of the inner circle, the scholar priestess Lyra. She was smaller, her carapace thinner, painted in the silver of the scientific cast. She was staring at the hologram with an intensity that unsettled Malvath. Where Calith saw an insult, Lyra saw a puzzle. "You are quiet, Lyra," Malvath observed. "Does the refuse of the apes intrigue you?" Lyra hesitated, her antennae twitching as she manipulated the data stream with a slender claw. "It is the hull density, Exarch," she said softly. "Look at the readings. We are scanning standard durasteel and titanium alloys on the surface, yes. The outer shell is primitive. It is scarred by micrometeoroids pitted by cosmic radiation. It looks ancient. But the mass displacement does not match the volume. The ship is too heavy." Calith scoffed. "They overload their cargo holds with rocks. They are miners. They are hauling ore." Lyra shook her head slowly. "No, the density is uniform, and the age carbon dating of the outer hull suggests this vessel has been in the void for longer than the Terran Union has existed, longer than their first warp drive. It is a relic, perhaps, or something. Hing they found, but my concern is the trajectory. It is not heading for a trade lane. It is not heading for a habitable world. It is on a direct intercept course with the deployment zone of the Iron Stormblade." The room went silent at the mention of the name. The Iron Stormblade was not merely a ship. It was the apex of Vraxis engineering. It was a dreadnought of the Eclipse class, a vessel so massive it possessed its own gravitational pull. It was the flagship of the Third Armada, a weapon designed to crack planetary crusts and silence rebellions before they could draw breath. It was currently conducting live-fire exercises in the uninhabited sector of Keth 7, testing the new singularity beam arrays. The idea that a human scavenger ship was drifting toward it was akin to an ant wandering into the path of a falling hammer. "It is a suicide run," Calith concluded, his tone shifting from anger to amusement. "A protest, perhaps. The humans are known for their dramatic, emotional gestures. They send a martyr to die against our greatest weapon to shame us, to prove a point about our aggression." Malveth looked at the projection of the blocky ship again. It was spinning slowly, lazily, tumbling end over end in a way that suggested a complete lack of navigational control, or perhaps a complete lack of care. "If it is a protest," Malveth said, standing up, his shadow stretching across the table, "we shall give them the audience they desire. The iron stormblade is active, its weapons are primed. We will not send a patrol wing, we will not send an interceptor, we will let the stormblade handle this nuisance." Calith grinned, a horrific baring of serrated teeth. "You wish to fire the singularity lance at a garbage scow? It is excessive, Exarch, wonderfully excessive." Malveth turned toward the massive viewport that looked out over the Dominion's shipyards. "Excess is the language of the Vraxis. Let the humans watch. Let them see that their ancient relics are nothing against the future we have built. Contact High Admiral Vorian. Tell him he has a target practice drone incoming. Tell him to obliterate it." The order was given, and the machinery of the Empire began to turn. Across the vastness of the sector, the subspace relays hummed with the command, carrying the death sentence of the human vessel at speeds faster than light. But in the silence of the Synod chamber, Lyra remained seated, watching the hologram of the ugly, rotating brick. She zoomed in on the hull, looking at the strange, geometric markings that ran along the spine of the ship. They were not military insignias. They were not warning stripes. They looked like equations. They looked like art. And deep in her gut, in the instinctual part of her biology that had allowed her ancestors to survive the great filter of their homeworld, she felt a cold, gnawing seed of dread. The ship was too heavy, it was too quiet, and it was moving with a certainty that disguised itself as a drift. "Exarch," she whispered, though Malveth had already left the room. "I do not think they are martyrs." The void of the Keth 7 sector was a canvas of absolute black, punctuated only by the distant, uncaring stars and the swirling purple bruise of a distant nebula. Dominating this emptiness was the iron stormblade. It was a monstrosity of beauty and terror, a spearhead of dark metal 5 kilometers long, bristling with lance batteries, missile silos, and the glowing blue apertures of plasma projectors. Engines the size of cities flared silently at its rear, keeping the Leviathan steady against the cosmic drift. Inside the bridge, the atmosphere was one of disciplined arrogance. High Admiral Vorian stood upon the command dais, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the tactical plot. He was a veteran of the border wars, a commander who had burned 3 sentient species to extinction for refusing the Dominion's tithe. He feared nothing, for he commanded the greatest weapon in the known galaxy. "Target status," Vorian barked, his voice clipped and precise. At the sensor pit, a young officer hesitated. "Target is closing, Admiral, constant velocity, no evasive maneuvers, no energy shielding detected. It is just drifting toward us." Vorian sneered. "Hail them again. If they have a communications array on that wreckage, tell them to alter course or be vaporized." The communications officer, a female with intricate cranial ridges, nodded and keyed the frequency. "Terran vessel. This is the Vraxis Dreadnought Iron Stormblade. You are entering a restricted military exclusion zone. Your presence is a violation of the Treaty of Saul. Alter your vector immediately to 040 relative or you will be destroyed." "This is your final warning." The bridge crew waited, silence stretched. The static of the void hissed over the speakers. Then a voice cut through. It was not the panicked pleading they expected. It was not the defiant shout of a fanatic. It was calm, almost W. Eerie, it sounded like an old man reading a weather report. "Vraxis vessel Iron Stormblade," the voice said. "This is the Terran vessel Hephaestus Anvil. We receive your warning. Unfortunately, our current trajectory is necessary for our calibration cycle. We cannot alter course. We advise you to move aside. We are conducting sensitive measurements." Orion blinked. The bridge crew froze. A ripple of disbelief washed over them. "Move aside," Vorian repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They tell the Iron Stormblade to move aside." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "They are insane. The isolation has driven them mad. They think because they have a ship that can cross the void, they are peers to the Dominion." He stepped forward, leaning over the rail of the dais. Open a channel, I want them to see me. The holographic screen flickered to life. The image that appeared was not a military bridge. It was a room that looked like a cluttered workshop or a library. There were shelves of physical books, paper books, and archaism that the Vraxis had abandoned millennia ago. There were plants, green and leafy, hanging from the ceiling. Sitting in a worn leather chair was a human. He had gray hair, a lined face, and he was wearing a simple textile jumpsuit with grease stains on the sleeves. He was holding a mug of steaming liquid. He looked up at the camera as if interrupted from a nap. "I am High Admiral Vorian of the Vraxis Dominion," Vorian thundered. "You are addressing the Supreme Commander of the Third Armada. You are drifting into the firing solution of a singularity lance. Do you understand the magnitude of your stupidity, human?" The human took a sip from his mug. He didn't look terrified. He looked mildly annoyed. "Admiral Vorian," the human said, placing the mug down on a stack of papers. "I'm Captain Halloway. Look, I understand you have a big ship. Very impressive, lots of guns, but we're on a very long burn here. We've been accelerating for well a while. We have a schedule. If we alter vector now, we lose 3 weeks of accumulation data. So really it's just easier if you shift your position. Just a few thousand kilometers to the left, if you will. You have the engines for it." Vorian's mandibles trembled with rage. The sheer banality of the human's tone was more insulting than any curse. "You are arrogant, little ape. You believe your primitive hull can withstand us." "It's not about withstand," Halloway said, rubbing his eyes. "It's about physics. We are carrying a lot of momentum, and we have equipment active. Your shields, your reactors, they create a lot of noise. We need quiet. Just move, please. We don't want an incident." "There will be no incident," Vorian roared. "There will only be dust. You have 10 seconds to power down your engines and prepare to be boarded and scrapped. If you do not, I will turn your floating museum into a cloud of atoms." Halloway sighed. He looked off-screen, presumably at another crew member. "They aren't listening, Sarah," he said, his voice still audible. "They never listen. It's the iron stormblade, apparently. Yes, I know, it sounds like a teenager named it." He looked back at the screen. "Admiral, I'm going to give you some advice, one professional to another. Do not fire that weapon at us. You are using a gravity compression system, yes, a singularity generator. If you fire that at our hull while our field is up, the feedback loop won't be healthy for you. We aren't shielding against you. We are shielding the universe from what we have inside. Just move." Vorian cut the channel. He was shaking with fury. "Tactical, lock all batteries, target the center of mass, charge the singularity lance to maximum yield, burn them out of the sky." The bridge turned red as alert klaxons wailed. The iron stormblade shuddered as the massive weapon systems drew power from the reactor core. The singularity lance, a weapon capable of creating a micro-black hole for a fraction of a second, began to glow with a terrifying violet light at the prow of the ship. "Target locked," the weapons officer shouted. "Firing in 3, 2, 1, fire." A beam of pure, distorted gravity lashed out from the dreadnought. It was a weapon that had ended civilizations. It twisted light, crushed matter, and erased anything it touched. It streaked across the void, covering the distance to the Hephaestus anvil in a heartbeat. The crew of the Stormblade watched, expecting the flash of destruction, the shattering of the primitive hull. But there was no flash. The violet beam hit the invisible perimeter of the human ship and simply stopped. It didn't bounce off. It didn't explode. It vanished. It was as if the beam had entered a doorway to nowhere. The energy enough to boil an ocean was swallowed without a trace. On the tactical display, the Hephaestus anvil continued its slow, tumbling rotation, completely unharmed. "Report!" Vorian screamed. "Did we miss? How can you miss at T?" "His range, direct hit confirmed, Admiral," the sensory officer cried, panic entering his voice. "The energy it was absorbed, no, not absorbed, negated. The readings, Admiral, the readings are impossible. The space around that ship, the fundamental constants are wrong. The speed of light is different inside their perimeter. The gravitational constant is different." Vorian stared at the screen. "Fire again, all batteries, missiles, plasma, everything." The iron stormblade unleashed hell. Thousands of missiles streaked forth. Beams of plasma hotter than the sun cut through the dark. It was a storm of fire that would have reduced a moon to gravel, and it all met the same fate. The missiles crossed a threshold 10 kilometers from the human hull and simply ceased to exist. They didn't detonate, they were disassembled. The plasma beams faded into nothingness, their energy drained away instantly. The human ship kept tumbling, slowly, inexorably. "Getting closer. They are jamming our sensors," Vorian insisted, though a cold sweat was breaking out under his carapace. "It is a trick, a hologram." Then the comms channel opened again. It was Captain Halloway. He didn't look annoyed anymore. He looked disappointed. "Admiral," Halloway said, "I warned you, that energy you just poured at us. We can't just let it dissipate. Our sinks are filling up. You're heating up our cryobaths. We have to vent the excess. And since you're the one who sent it, I'm afraid you're going to get it back. Not as a weapon, just as waste heat. "What are you?" Vorian began. On the screen, the Hephaestus anvil stopped its tumbling. A series of panels on the side facing the dreadnought opened. They weren't gun ports. They looked like radiator grills. A pulse of white light, silent and expanding in a perfect sphere, erupted from the human ship. It wasn't an attack. It was a vent. It was the ship shedding the energy the Vraxis had poured into it. The wave hit the iron stormblade. Shields that could withstand supernova radiation flared and shattered instantly. The dreadnought groaned, a sound transmitted through the hull to the bones of the crew. Lights died. Gravity failed. The massive engines sputtered and died. The greatest warship in the galaxy was suddenly drifting, dead in the water, powered down by an electromagnetic surge so potent it fried every circuit that wasn't hardened to a theoretical maximum. On the bridge, emergency chemical lights cracked to life, bathing the terrified crew in a sickly green glow. Vorian clutched the railing, breathing hard. His ship was a brick. They killed us," he whispered. "No, Admiral," the sensor officer said, his voice trembling over a battery-powered backup console. "We are not destroyed. Life support is functioning on auxiliary, but the main core is offline. The weapons are fused. The computer banks are wiped. We are neutralized." A silence deeper than the void settled over the bridge. They were alive. The humans hadn't fired a weapon. They had simply opened a window and let the draft in. The Hephaestus anvil drifted past them, so close that Vorian could see the individual rivets on the hull through the viewport. It was massive, far larger than it had appeared on the scans. And as it passed, blocking out the stars, Vorian realized it wasn't a warship. It was a machine. A machine of such scale and complexity that the guns of the Vraxis were like throwing stones at a hurricane. The news of the iron stormblade's neutralizing did not cause panic in the High Synod. It caused a paralysis of understanding. The reports were fragmentary. The dreadnought was being towed back to base by tugs. Its crew was alive but traumatized. The human ship had continued on its path, disappearing into the dark of the outer rim. High Exarch Malveth sat in the chamber, the silence heavy. Scholar Priestess Lyra was reviewing the black box data retrieved from the stricken dreadnought. Her face was pale. "It was not a weapon," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "The energy vent, it was entropy, controlled entropy. They accelerated the decay of our energy systems. They aged our reactor to death in a microsecond." Malveth looked at her. The arrogance was gone from his posture. He looked old. "What are they, Lyra? If they are not soldiers, what are they?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But we cannot fight them. If we fire again, if we escalate, they might not be so gentle next time. We must talk to them. We must understand." "Talk," Calith snarled, though his fire was dampened. "We are the Vraxis. We do not negotiate with scavengers." "They are not scavengers, you fool," Malveth roared, his voice cracking. "They obliterated the Stormblade without firing a shot. They treated our flagship like a noise complaint. We will talk, and we will listen." A diplomatic envoy was dispatched, not a fleet but a single, unarmed courier vessel. It carried Malveth himself and Lyra. It chased the signal of the Hephaestus anvil for weeks, finally catching up to it in the deep void between star systems. They hailed the ship this time with humility. The response was immediate. "Vraxis vessel, you are cleared to dock. Bay 4, mind the gravity gradient." The docking bay of the Hephaestus anvil was vast enough to hold a city. When the airlock cycled and Malveth and Lyra stepped out, they did not step into a military corridor. They stepped into a forest. The air was rich with oxygen and the scent of pine and damp earth. Above them, a simulated sky mimicked the light of a yellow sun. Birds, actual biological avians, flew between towering trees that grew from the deck plates. A path of crushed stone led forward. Walking down the path to meet them was Captain Halloway, now wearing a tweed jacket over his jumpsuit. He looked like a gardener who had been interrupted while pruning his roses. "Welcome," Halloway said, extending a soft, fleshy hand. Malveth hesitated, then took it. The grip was firm but not aggressive. "Captain," Malveth said, his voice regulated by his translator. We appreciate the audience. I'm High Exarch Malveth." "I know who you are," Halloway said, gesturing for them to follow. "And this is Lyra, I presume? You're scientist. We read your scans. You were the only one who noticed the mass discrepancy. Good eye." Lyra stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her fear. "Captain, this ship, it is not a colony vessel, it is not a warship. What is it? The mass, the interior is larger than the exterior. You are folding space." Halloway smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "It's an ark, Lyra, but not for people. We have plenty of planets for people. This is an ark for physics, for logic." They walked through the forest, passing clear domes where strange, swirling energies were suspended in stasis fields. "You see," Halloway began, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer, "the Vraxis, the Itari, the others, you all developed quickly. You found element zero or warp crystals or whatever local shortcut physics provided in your sector. You jumped to the stars with guns blazing. You built empires. We are strong, Malveth said, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. You are loud, Holloway corrected gently. Humanity, we didn't have shortcuts. We were stuck on Earth for a long time. Alone, no warp gates, no magic crystals, just math and stubbornness. We had to learn how the universe worked the hard way. We had to crack the code of reality with brute force intellect. By the time we figured out how to leave our solar system, we didn't just know how to bend gravity. We knew how to knit it. He stopped before a massive window that looked into the ship's core. Inside, a small star was burning. Not a fusion reactor, but a literal, captured star compressed to the size of a house powering the vessel. We realized that the galaxy is full of children running with scissors, Holloway said. You build weapons that tear at the fabric of space, singularity lances, warp bombs. You don't understand the damage you do. You're fraying the carpet of reality. Malvath stared at the captured star. So you are police? Janitors, Holloway said. We are the maintenance crew. The Hephaestus anvil is a stabilizer. We travel to sectors where the local vacuum energy is getting thin, usually because of wars like yours, and we patch it. We reinforce the laws of physics so the universe doesn't unravel. The revelation hit Malvath like a physical blow. The Vraxis had spent centuries believing they were the apex predators, the masters of the galaxy. They had viewed humans as weak because they didn't expand, didn't conquer, but the humans weren't playing the game of conquest. They were building the board the game was played on. They were the ones keeping the lights on. The iron stormblade, Lyra whispered. You didn't attack it, you reset it. I grounded it, Holloway said. It was generating a dangerous resonance. I couldn't let it fire that lance. It would have caused a localized vacuum collapse, so I dampened the reaction. I'm sorry about the damage. Your admiral was very persistent. Malvath looked at the human, this small, soft creature. You could have destroyed us. You could have destroyed the Dominion. With this power, why do you hide? Why do you let us mock you? Holloway shrugged. Does the elephant care if the ant mocks him? We have work to do, Exarch, real work. We don't have time for empire building. It's tedious. He turned to them, his expression growing serious. But that's not why I let you board. We usually ignore the locals. I invited you here because we need to talk about the deeper dark. The deeper dark? Lyra asked. Holloway tapped a panel on the wall. The forest dissolved, replaced by a holographic map of the universe. Not just the galaxy, but the web of galaxies stretching out to the cosmic horizon. We fix the damage you do, Holloway said. But there is damage we didn't cause. There is a signal C. Oming from the void between the galaxies. Something is eating the stars out there, not conquering them, erasing them. He zoomed in on a patch of blackness where galaxies should have been. It was empty. We call it the entropy tide. It's coming. It's been coming for 1 billion years. It's why we built these ships, not to fight you, to build a seawall. Malvath looked at the emptiness on the map. He felt a fear that transcended politics, a primal fear of the dark. And you can stop it. Alone? No, Holloway said. We have the technology, we have the ancient ships, as you call them. We have the anvils and the hammers, but we don't have the numbers. We are few. We spent so long perfecting ourselves, we forgot to multiply. He looked at the Vraxis Exarch. You, on the other hand, you breed, you build, you are aggressive, you are vital. You have thousands of ships. They are crude, yes. They are loud, but they are many. You want an alliance, Lyra realized. You want us to fight for you. I want you to fight with us, Holloway corrected. We will give you the shields that don't break. We will give you the engines that don't tear the sky. We will teach you how to be strong without breaking the world. And in exchange, you will provide the iron. You will provide the hulls. You will provide the stormblades, but better ones. Malvath stood tall. For the first time in his life, he felt not like a conqueror, but like a soldier in a war that actually mattered. The petty squabbles over nebulas and border tithes evaporated. The universe was dying, and the humans, the quiet, boring, terrifying humans, were the only ones holding the line. The Dominion respects strength, Malvath said, his voice rumbling with a new kind of conviction. We thought strength was the power to kill. You have shown us that strength is the power to endure. He held out his clawed hand. Teach us, Captain, the Vraxis will be your iron. Holloway took the hand. Good, because the tide is rising, Exarch, and we have a lot of sandbags to fill. The transition was not immediate, but it was absolute. The return of Exarch Malvath to the Synod marked the end of the Vraxis dominion as an empire of conquest and the beginning of the Vraxis guardianship. The reports of the Iron Stormblade's defeat had already shattered the myth of Vraxis invincibility, but the truth Malvath brought back offered a new purpose. The humans did not demand submission. They did not demand tribute. They sent engineers. Small, shuttle-sized craft detached from the Hephaestus anvil and descended upon the Vraxis shipyards. The human engineers were strange creatures to the militaristic aliens. They walked without armor. They spoke in soft tones. They looked at the terrifying weaponry of the Vraxis and sighed, pulling out tools that manipulated matter on a subatomic level. Captain Holloway remained in orbit, overseeing the retrofit. The iron stormblade was the first to be reborn. The humans stripped out the singularity lance. Too messy, they said. Inefficient. Instead, they installed a gravimetric harmonizer. It didn't punch holes in reality, it solidified it. It could lock an enemy ship in a stasis field so absolute that time effectively stopped for the target. They replaced the volatile plasma reactors with zero-point modules, drawing energy from the vacuum itself. When the stormblade launched again, it didn't roar. It hummed. A low, resonant thrum that could be felt in the teeth. Admiral Vorian, humbled and terrified, was kept in command, but with a human advisor at his side. A young woman named Sarah who drank too much caffeine and corrected his tactical calculations with a bored expression. The culture clash was immense. The Vraxis were a warrior culture, they lived for glory. The humans were a culture of problem solvers, they lived for results. In the mess halls of the combined fleet, Vraxis soldiers would boast of their kills, while human engineers would boast of their efficiency ratings. "I killed 10 Valeri warriors in close combat," a Vraxis marine would roar. "I optimized the waste heat recycling loop by 4.5%, a human technician would reply, receiving a round of applause from her peers. Slowly, the Vraxis began to understand. The humans weren't pacifists, they were perfectionists. War was just another system with too many variables and too much waste. They didn't want to fight, they wanted to solve the equation of conflict with the remainder of zero. But the galaxy was large, and not everyone was as adaptable as the Vraxis. As the Vraxis human fleets began to move toward the outer rim, toward the encroaching entropy tide, other empires took notice. The Itari, the masters of psionic warfare, saw the movement as a threat. They saw the Vraxis bowing to the primitive humans and assumed weakness. They assembled a crusade. A fleet of crystal ships, powered by the minds of 1,000,000 psychics, moved to intercept the Hephaestus anvil. They believed the human had enslaved the Vraxis. They believed they were liberators. They intercepted the fleet in the nebula of Othries. The Itari broadcast a psychic scream, a wave of telepathic terror meant to break the minds of the enemy crews. Against the Vraxis of old, it might have worked. But the Vraxis were no longer fighting for pride, and they were no longer unprotected. On the bridge of the Hephaestus anvil, Holloway felt the headache of the psychic attack. He rubbed his temples. "Annoying," he muttered. "Sarah, engage the psi dampeners." "On it, Cap," Sarah replied from the iron stormblade. The human ships didn't use psychic shields. They used noise-canceling physics. They broadcast a counter-frequency, a mathematical pattern that was the exact inverse of the Itari brainwave patterns. The psychic scream cut off instantly. The Itari fleet, dependent on their mental link to navigate, fell into chaos. Their ships drifted, blind and deaf. "Do we fire?" Vorian asked, his finger hovering over the button for the new gravimetric cannons. "No," Holloway said. "We integrate." The Hephaestus anvil moved forward. It didn't fire weapons. It fired information. It broadcast the data of the entropy tide. It showed the Itari the same map Holloway had shown Malvath. It projected the image of the dying galaxies directly onto the bridges of the crystal ships. The truth was a weapon more potent than any laser. The Itari, beings of sensitivity and foresight, saw the darkness coming. They felt the cold of the end of the universe. The fighting stopped not because of surrender, but because the context of the fight had been rendered meaningless. Why fight over a room in a burning house? Years passed, the fleet grew. It was no longer a Vraxis fleet or a human fleet. It was the Armada of the Anchor, a bizarre, terrifying mix of aesthetics. The blocky, industrial human command ships surrounded by the predatory Vraxis dreadnoughts and the crystalline Itari cruisers. They moved to the edge of the galaxy, to the halo stars where the darkness was thickest. Here, the reality of the threat became visible. The stars in the distance were not twinkling. They were flickering out. The entropy tide was not a fleet. It was a phenomenon, a breakdown of physical laws spreading like a cancer. Where the tide touched, matter lost cohesion. Atoms forgot how to bond. Light forgot how to travel. It was the end of the story of the universe, approaching at the speed of inevitability. Holloway stood on the observation deck of the anvil, looking out at the abyss. He was older now. His hair was white. Malvath stood beside him, his chitin graying with age. "It is massive," Malvath said softly. "Can we stop it?" "We can't stop the wind," Holloway said, "but we can build a windmill." He gestured to the fleet. Tens of thousands of ships. The industrial might of the Vraxis, the psychic coordination of the Itari, the impossible engineering of the humans. We are going to stitch the sky back together, Malveth. We are going to deploy the reality anchors. It will require every ounce of power your ships can generate. It will require every mind the Itari can focus. And it will require my people to thread the needle. The operation began. It was not a battle of explosions. It was a battle of construction. The fleet formed a massive ring light years across, facing the oncoming nothingness. The Vraxis ships revved their engines, pouring raw energy into the human-built anchors. The Itari focused their minds, guiding the energy streams, and the human ships, they danced. The Hephaestus Anvil and her sisters moved into the center of the ring, into the path of the tide. They activated their drives. They didn't move through space. They grabbed space and pulled it tight. They created a localized inflation event, a burst of creation to counter the destruction. For days, the struggle continued. The strain was immense. Vraxis ships burned out their cores, their crews venting plasma to keep the anchors fed. "Hold the line," Vorian's voice crackled over the comms, sounding more proud than he ever had as a conqueror. "For the light, hold the line." The Itari wept as the psychic strain broke their minds, but they did not let go. And Holloway sat in his chair, watching the numbers. The sensors screamed as the tide hit the wall of the anchors. Reality buckled. The viewports cracked. The universe groaned under the weight of the conflict between being and non-being. And then it held. The black tide slowed. It hit the reinforced lattice of space-time the Armada had created and washed against it like water against a cliff. It could not dissolve the anchors. The physics were too thick, too robust. The decay stopped. The flickering stars on the horizon stabilized. The darkness did not retreat. Entropy cannot be reversed, only halted, but it moved no further. The galaxy was safe. Silence returned to the bridge of the Hephaestus Anvil. Holloway slumped in his chair, exhausted. The G of coffee on his console had vibrated to the floor, shattering. He looked at the shards. Entropy. Things break, but they can be glued back together. Malveth placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did it," the Exarch said, his voice filled with awe. "We fought the end of time and we won." Holloway smiled, closing his eyes. "We didn't win, old friend. We just bought time, maybe a few billion years, but that's enough. That's enough time for the new races to grow up. Enough time for someone smarter than us to figure out how to fix it permanently." The fleet remained at the edge of the galaxy, a permanent vigil. They became a legend, the guardians of the Rim. The Vraxis, once feared as the Iron Storm, became the Iron Shield. The humans, once mocked as scavengers, were remembered as the architects. And the Iron Stormblade, it never fired a shot in anger again. It hung in the void, its weapons silent, its sensors turned outward, watching the dark, daring it to try again. The ancient ship no one feared had not only obliterated a weapon, it had obliterated the idea of war itself, replacing it with a duty far heavier and far more glorious. The duty of keeping the lights on in a universe that desperately wanted to sleep. The story of the Iron Stormblade's defeat became a parable taught in the creches of the Vraxis and the schools of Earth. It taught that true power does not scream. It does not posture. True power is the quiet hum of a machine doing its job. It is the patience of a gardener in a forest. It is the ability to look at a gun and see not a threat, but a broken tool that needs to be fixed. And as the epochs passed and the stars wheeled overhead, the Alliance stood firm, a monument to the day the galaxy stopped fighting itself and turned to face the dark together. The silence of the humans was not emptiness. It was the deep breath before the work began, and the work never ended.